Okay, welcome back. As I said, it was a very quick one. Our guests are Dr. Muda Yusuf and Mr. Iyemi Shoneye. Now to Dr. Yusuf, who is with us remotely. Dr. Yusuf, you ended last time you spoke about this inconvenience to the ordinary person. Whereas because of the alternative channel thing, there are those that might be able to get away. After all, what do you need cash for? Is to exchange it for goods. So I understand when they say that customers in that need, should just use the internet banking. That is what they call alternative channels. How many people are then on those channels is another thing. But Dr. Yusuf, talk to us a bit about the inconvenience that will be brought to bear on, the ordinary person that you were referring to, making life difficult for such a person.
Well, cash is a mode of payment. And in any business, payments are necessary at least to activate economic activities. In the distributive trade sector, a lot of cash is involved. The distributive trade sector accounts for about 15% of our GDP. In 2021, that sector contributed about 21 trillion naira to this economy. So this policy is going to have a major negative impact on trade and commerce. I say this because majority of the players in that sector are in the informal sector. Some of them are not literate and they are doing very good business. Many of them are in very remote locations. When you talk about commodity trading, in the hinterland, bringing of grains and all of that, beans, all these things in the rural areas to the city. These transactions sometimes run into millions. And these people still don't have that much confidence in this electronic and this banking system. In any case, in many of those locations, there are no banks. Apart from the issue of trust, some of them, what they see is what they believe. And don't forget, there are all sorts of cyber crimes going on now.
Yeah.
I had an experience of somebody in Okeani. Somebody came to buy a whole lot of goods. He transferred, the man got an alert, but the money was not in his account. Only God knows how they were doing it. Since that day, the man said, anybody who's coming to pay, unless they go to the bank together to verify that the money is actually sitting in their account, before he can release his goods. So we need to be inclusive in the policy process.
I do.
Already we have made significant progress in this space. For the little segment of the Nigerians that are not already there, we don't need to be very repressive about them. We need to create incentives, we need to encourage them, but we need to relate to the reality that many of our people are in locations that still use a lot of cash. If you want to buy a cattle now, do you know how much a cattle is? How many of these Fulanis have bank accounts? How many of them are in very remote locations? A cattle now, you'll be talking about between 250 to 300 or 400,000 per head of cattle. Then you have all these guys selling tomato and all of that. Many of them are using cash. And they are Nigerians.
But the aim, but the general aim, Dr. Yusuf, is to head for a cashless society. I hear that there are countries in Africa that have gone quite far down the road in that regard.
Uncle Yori, we have made more progress than any country in Africa. I can tell you that. I just read out the figures to you. Cash as a percentage of our GDP is 1.8%. In many of these countries, they are doing 9%. Even in Japan, they are doing about 15%. We are ahead of many advanced economies. POS transaction in the first 9 months of this year was 6.43 trillion. Is that far not more than all the cash we are talking about? Electronic transaction in the first 9 months was 271 trillion naira. Is that not progress already?
You know, the way you're
inconvenience Nigerians.
The way you're saying it, Dr. Yusuf, it seems so intuitive, and I would imagine. I'm wondering, not imagine. I'm wondering the experts who would have, formed a panel or whatever to advise government as to how to go, surely they must be aware of all that you are saying, yet government still went down this route. What do you think government has been presented to differently from what I referred to as your submission, which seems to me to be, quite frankly, intuitive?
Well, I don't know what is informing this decision. If the policy is motivated by politics or this criminality thing, perhaps I can concede some ground to them. But we should not do that at the expense of millions of Nigerians that are doing legitimate business.
Okay. All right.
There are many ingenious ways of dealing with this problem without disrupting the economy.
Okay.
We are still contending with this issue of the coloration of the Naira notes. Just on that one has not settled.
Yeah.
Now we are introducing this again.
Yes.
It's not fair.
Yes.
It's not fair at all.
Okay. Back to you. I'll be back to you, Dr. Yusuf, because this policy that we're talking about followed CBN's change of, well, it was supposed to be a redesign, but I don't know. I haven't been able to look at it very, very closely. It seems to me to be merely switching of the colors so that the 50 Naira note that we know now is now, people will understand it. I think that's the new 1,000 Naira. I'm not sure.
I'm not sure of the colors.
They just switched the colors around. There were colors that were in existence, but when we hold it in our hands, we will know. So that's what CBN called a redesign. And they've done it. And as Dr. Yusuf was saying there, depending on what the objective was, he can see and concede some of those things to him. But back to that question about the larger, no, I shouldn't say damage, but because I was going to try and use an analogy of corollary damage, but it's not damage here. The negative effect on people and a significant part of our society, as Dr. Yusuf pointed out, how do you see that particular area? Government has an objective. It wants to bring down criminality. It wants to make it much more difficult to be able to buy votes and all of that kind of a thing. But at the expense of what?
Well, definitely the policies have knock-on effects, which are undesired.
That's the word economists use, the knock-on effects.
Which are undesired. They were unintended, the unintended consequences.
But they would have been known.
Well, the thought would be that, let's drive. I think the objective is actually to drive, the amount of transactions being conducted within the banks. Mm-hmm. Now, the World Bank stats as of 2021, end of 2021, says that 45% of the adult population of Nigerians are banked. So, which means you have well over 50% of adults in Nigeria unbanked. And that is spread to like 70% people adults in urban population are banked, and then under 40% of adult population in rural areas are banked. So which means that, you have a whole lot of things happening outside the banking system. So which is pretty much what you call the informal economy. Now, there have been a number of attempts at driving things to the formal economy.
Yes.
But
including things like zero balance, open a new account,
even when CBN introduced the BVN, yes, they also came up with what you call the BVN Lite, so that you have more people coming into the banking system. But what you have, especially in the rural areas, just as Dr. Yusuf said, is that there are quite a number of people that are cut off from the banking sector for so many reasons. Because one, there are no ATMs in those areas. There are no banks in those areas. And the reason why I wouldn't go to set up a bank in a rural area is not far-fetched. The security issues, the logistic issues, so some of those things ought to have been considered, before we now constrict the cash. Mm-hmm. I hear some people say, oh, you know what, the POS regime is pretty much widespread because if you can't get access to cash, then you go to the POS handlers. But what is happening even with those POS handlers is that they are not necessarily making it inclusive for people to come into the banking fold. And using those particular POS handlers is pretty much expensive and exposes people.
Yes.
It's pretty much expensive than what you even get in terms of what you are charged in a bank.
But people seem to be ready to pay because of the convenience.
Because of the convenience. But now it means that such payments for such convenience will be translated into add-on costs to the end user, the final consumer. So really, some of those knock-on effects may not have been completely considered, before saying, let us drive inclusivity. Let us drive, the number of people that come into the banking system. And I think, in terms of also other considerations, is the fact that the infrastructure that holds this together, whether it is the interbank infrastructure for you to be able to withdraw, your funds from an ATM of the bank, Bank A, so those challenges, those infrastructure are not, on top of their game because people encounter a number of these problems. So the truth would have been to look at this thing. I think it is good to have a cashless policy because if you look at a place in Kenya, they are using mobile money, for instance, to drive all these final engagements at the retail level. But in Nigeria, it's very difficult to drive those engagements at the retail level. I would not be paying for my boss using, the ATM
we haven't developed it to that extent, yes.
So,
where you can ticketize everything.
Exactly, and we have also not gained that high level of trust to be able to, conclude transactions over electronic channels. So there are
still people who are, even in urban areas, you will hear now and again somebody will say to you, I don't have an ATM card, I don't want one. I just don't trust it. Haven't had an unpleasant experience, and all these things that you were talking about.
Absolutely.
Sometimes it's not available. Dr. Yusuf, as a sort of a related subject, trying to go cashless and all of that, to the extent, I don't know the extent that they are to be believed, but on social media, you've seen trailer loads of bearing Naira notes in all sorts of stages of decay, falling apart, that kind of a thing. Now, even if this policy hadn't come about, would such money not simply have disappeared by way of value because there would be rules and guidelines and policies for what the bank can accept? Rotting notes.
Well, that's it's a reflection of how corrupt the society is. And let me say, the CBN cannot fight all the fires. It cannot solve all problems. The CBN responsibility is monetary stability, financial stability, exchange rate stability. Every department of government has its own responsibilities. Now, when we are talking about Naira loads, trailer loads of currencies, how did that get out from the banking system in the first place? Are there no records within the banks? Unless you are telling me that these things are fake.
Well, for instance, sorry, doctor, for instance, somebody buys a cow in a rural area. He's not going to take the money to the bank. He's going to give it to the cattle owner. That one doesn't go to the bank. He puts it underground somewhere. In that sort of way, it built up till we have trailer loads of money that has been treated like that for maybe the past 15 years or so. And now the notes are rotting because they were not stored properly. Maybe that's how it got out of it. Maybe it didn't get out of the bank. Maybe it didn't get to the bank in the first place.
Well, there are two components of that. There are those who, just as you said, legitimately earn this money. And because they don't believe so much in the banking system, either for cultural reasons, for logistics reasons, or for religious reasons, they prefer to keep their money. But there are also the criminal component of it.
Okay.
The money laundering. And so there are two components. Okay. And my understanding from the way the CBN and some other people have been talking, it's about this sentiment of people who have stolen money, people who want to buy votes and all of that.
Okay, I've got to, can we pick it up after this break? Thank you very much, Dr. Yusuf. So sorry. Stay with us, please. We'll be right back.